Recently, I picked up a 10th scale model of an Allison turboprop motor that I need to get built and weathered, and I'm going to be using it in some filming I'm going to be doing later this year, so I've got to make sure it's nicely weathered to fit into the scene that I'm going to be using it in. But before we can do that weathering, we've got to get the model built. So let's go ahead and do that now. Before we go any further, I just wanted to stop real quick and remind everybody about safety when using a hobby knife. You're going to notice that the first finger on my left hand, the rest of this video, is going to have a Band-Aid wrapped on it, and that's because I didn't heed my own advice. So when using an X-Acto knife or any kind of hobby knife, guys, just remember, always be aware of what you're doing, where your fingers are, where you're cutting towards, because I sure don't want you to see any of you cut yourself, especially you younger folks out there that are watching this. Just be very safe when using those sharp knives. They really can cut you pretty bad, which I did myself. So I just wanted to explain why there's a Band-Aid on my finger the rest of this video. Now let's get back to the build. The build was very straightforward and pretty simple. There were some small parts, some tubing, some piping that took a little tedious and took some time, but just had to take your time with it, and that went together pretty easy. Also, used 4 colors so far. I've got a blue color, an orange color, silver, and a gunmetal color, basically just blocking in color on the model. I did also come back in and use some gold and some copper to do a little bit of detailing, but that's about it so far. So now we just need to weather up the motor. And for the scene that this is going to be used in, or for the video shoot that this is going to be used in, it's going to need to be pretty heavily weathered, just dirty and sooty looking, like it's old. So we need to take care of that. But first, we got to take a commercial break, and when we come back, I'll show you just how we weather it. I'm going to start the weathering process by giving the whole thing a coat of matte clear. I'm going to do this for 2 reasons. One, I want to seal in the paint I've already applied, and so that I can apply the weathering on top of the matte coat. But I also want to take away any shine from the motor and just give it a flat, used look. Once the matte clear is completely dry, then I'm going to add a coat of black wash to the model, to the entire model. And this is actually diluted black wash. So what I've done is I've taken some Vallejo black wash and I've diluted it 1-to-1 with water. So 1 part water, 1 part black wash. And what you can think of, like what we're doing here, is almost doing a water painting. So when we built the model, I painted in the midtones. So the blue you see, the silver, the orange, the gunmetal. That's like your midtones. And then we're going to take these thinned out washes and some other techniques and build layers that are darker and build layers that are brighter or lighter than those midtones we've already blocked in. So what I'm doing here is adding a darker layer of thinned black wash, and what it's going to give it is kind of a grimy look. You give the whole thing a coat and you'll get this overall kind of grimy, dirty, old look. I'm not being very picky where I place it. In fact, I'm really just trying to give the entire model a coat. You can even be a little blotty with it. You can let it run. You can blot, run. Just use some different techniques to give some different textures in the black. And once it completely dries, you're going to just have a very dirty, old look. And then here at the end, what I want to do is just add a green board behind the model so you can get a look at what it looks like when it's dry. So I'll do this through each stage. I'll add the green board behind, and it gives you a good look from stage to stage. But here's what this first coat of black looks like dried so far. Like I mentioned before, we want to build in layers. So what I'm doing here is I'm coming back with the same diluted black wash, and I'm just adding another layer to this combustion engine portion of the motor where I think it's going to be a little dirtier, a little grimier. It's going to have a little bit more dirt and grime. So I just want to build up another layer using the exact same black wash, and I'll do this a few times over until I get it to that point of kind of grimy dirtiness that I'm really looking for. And then what I'll do is I'll come in with some brown wash. Now this is undiluted, just straight Tamiya brown wash, and I'm going to use this to create leaks. So this is an old motor. It started leaking over the years where it's leaked, and then they've tried to clean it up, and it's going to have some staining from the oil that's dripped down. So what I want to do is think about where these leaks would come from. Where would there be seals, connections, joints, that kind of thing that might leak? And I also want to think a little bit artistically here. So I don't want to just stack up all the leaks on top of each other. I want to kind of work them across the motor, but I also don't want to overdo it because it's very easy to overdo these kind of details. You don't want to just have leaks everywhere. So think a little bit artistically, think a little bit strategically before you start applying the brown wash when you start making these leaks. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to build up the wash onto the brush and let gravity do the work. So you just build up a nice kind of pool of brown wash and let gravity pull it down and let it just drip down the side of the motor. Now I might persuade it in a direction, but I want gravity here to really do the work because that gives you a more natural look, a more natural look of a leak, and you don't want to paint it on there is what I'm really getting at. Just let it run down the side. And then what I'll do is I'll come in with a big brush that I've just loaded up with water. So this brush, all that's on this brush is water, and I'm going to use it again like we're watercoloring or water painting. I'm going to build up some water on top of these leaks, and I'm going to just kind of dilute it and let it run even more. So what we're doing is we're thinning the brown wash on the model. So instead of thinning it before like we did with the black wash, we're thinning the brown on the model. And what this does is it helps it run, and it helps it give it a little more natural look. So you're going to get some darks and lights. Really, again, this is like a water painting technique, but it'll get you a really good look for stains and like old stains. So these are old leaks that have now stained the motor. And I'll also do it in the back at some different joints. So what I'll do is I'll apply heavy coats of the brown wash. As you can see here, I'm just brushing on a heavy coat of the brown wash, and then I'll come back with that big brush that's just loaded with straight water. This is only water, and I'll start blending it in. I'll just blend it out into the silver, out into the body of the jet engine there, and it'll really give you a good look of old rust and grime and stain. But anyways, just use a wet brush to do the work for you. And here's another quick look of how it's coming so far with everything dry. I'm going to build up our lighter tones using this Tamiya weathering kit. I'm going to use the silver out of this weathering kit, and I'm going to brush that onto the edges and corners of these gunmetal parts. Now, before we were using washes, now this is dry pigment. So this is another technique you can use when weathering. And what you want to do, ignore the rust on the other side of the brush. I'm actually using some silver on these darker points, on these darker parts. And I want to go in and just kind of brush this on lightly on edges, on high points, on corners, on bolt heads, things that would take normal wear and tear. I want to just lightly brush this on and build it up again, building up in layers with this dry pigment. Now, I just want to point out again, guys, it takes layers to do this. Just like we were building in layers with the black wash, you got to build in layers with your lighter. If you're using light pigments or even light washes, you still got to build in layers. You'll never be able to do a weathering technique in one step. You'll never grab a brush and some kind of paint and then bam, you have a weathering technique. No, you've got to build in layers. And so what I'm going to do now is move down to this other dark part. You can see this is a part that we painted gunmetal, and to me this looks like a cast piece. Everything else kind of looks like aluminum whatnot. This casing here looks cast to me. So what I'm going to do is come again with the silver, hit the high points, hit the bolt heads, and then I flip my brush around and I'm using the actual brush in, and I'm going to end and I'm going to powder on that silver. Just give it a nice powder coating, and for me that gives it that nice pitted look of a cast part. It just gives it, I think it's a nice technique to just kind of powder over the whole thing, and it really makes it look cast and less smooth. And then I also want to come in and hit some of the painted parts or some of the blue parts of the motor also. So I want it to look like these edges and corners have taken a little wear over the years and it's worn it down back to the bare metal. So I'll just lightly add in some of that silver onto the edges and corners of the painted parts, and that gives it I think a really nice weird look. And again, I'm going to keep working in those layers. So I'll kind of hit all the edges that I think need to be worn, and then I'll come back and hit it again. Now, I also want to do the bolt head. So when we added the black washes, it really adds definition to different bolts. But you can see if we come back and hit the high points with the silver or a lighter tone, it really brings out those bolts and makes them pop. And it really gives it a good weathering effect. And again, another quick look at where we're at so far. Now I want to start weathering the jet engine portion of this motor, which I would think would be very dark black and kind of just sooty looking from all the smoke and grime that would be hitting it as it worked throughout the years. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use 3 different techniques, starting with the same technique we've already used, where I'm using the brush, and I'm just going to add the black dry pigment from the Tamiya weathering kit, and I'm going to kind of give it an overall black coat of this, which should give it a kind of a dirty grime look. I'm also going to try to hit the edges and the high points with this black also, and again working it in layers, and I'm going to keep it heavier towards the jet side and then get lighter as I come closer to the combustion engine side, but I just want to work these layers. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip that brush around back to the brush side, and I'm going to use that same dry black pigment, but this time I'm going to add a little water to it. That way I can really smudge it around, get it real grimy, and I can also build it up into those recesses. So by adding a little moisture to this dried pigment, I can really build it up in those edges. And I want to do it this way instead of the wash, because the wash is going to run on me. So this I don't want to run. I want to be able to put it in the places I want it to be and stay there. Just like when smoke was to be enveloping this motor, it would just coat the whole thing. It wouldn't run. So that's why I'm using the dry pigment with just a little bit of moisture so it doesn't run, but I can still manipulate it and get it packed in to those edges, into those recesses. And I'm trying to keep it darker at the jet end again and work it lighter towards the combustion engine side. And the last technique I'm going to use is an age-old technique, just a dry brush technique. So I'm going to use some black paint, I'm going to load up a brush, and then I'm going to wipe off most all the paint, and this with a real dry brush I'm going to start brushing in, smudging in some black just to get it really dark, really sooty. And guys, do not be scared to use your fingers. Go back to those finger painting techniques you learned when you were a child and bring those back out. I didn't take any pictures. I should have taken pictures of my hands when I was done doing this, but I mean, just covered in black paint and pigments. I'll constantly use my fingers to try to smudge the paint and get it to move where I want. When it comes to smudging paint, it's going to work way better. You could use sponges and things of that sort, but for me, just getting in there with my fingers, getting to be able to feel what I'm doing, it works so much better. And like I said, when my hands were done, they were covered in all kinds of in everything from paint to the washes. And I should have taken pictures. They're just filthy. But get in there and get dirty. Have a good time. That's the most important thing about weathering. Well, there's two important things: layers, like I've been talking about, and just having fun. There is nothing more fun than doing some weathering, especially when it's dirty weathering, and just getting yourself dirty, getting in there and just having a blast with it, guys. So don't be afraid. I have a lot of people tell me they're afraid of doing weathering. I don't want to paint this, and then I'm scared to weather it because I'm scared. You cannot mess up weathering. That's what it is. Weathering happens in all different ways. It's almost impossible to mess up. Just get in there, get at it, get dirty, and have a blast. And the last thing I want to do is use some of the rust color out of the Tamiya weathering kit, and I'm going to use the brush end of the brush to powder on some of this rust color. And what I'm trying to do here is blend the black that we just applied kind of into the rest of the motor, into the silver color of the motor. So I let that black completely dry, and I'll just powder it into that silver, blend it into the silver, giving it a more natural look. It also cuts back a little bit of the brightness of the orange, which I thought was a little bright also, so it really subdues that orange in a natural way, or in a kind of a dirty natural way. But really what I want to do is blend that black that we applied into the silver of the motor, giving it a more of a natural look. And I'll use that same rust color, that same dry pigment on the edges of the stand. So I would think this stand would most likely be made out of steel or something that would rust. So what I do is I load up the little end of the brush real heavy with the dry pigment of the rust color, and then run that across the edges, and it gives it a really nice rust look. And just do it on the edges and places that you would think would be rusty. And if you load up real heavy and drag across that edge, it'll kind of dust off a little bit. In fact, you can see it right there where it went on to. I smudged it with my finger. You'll get these really cool looks of rust. In fact, here's a final look. You can take your look yourself and see what you think. Again, this is just my process for doing weathering. Everybody has their own way of doing it. And in fact, if you have a better way or a way that you think is a little better, let me know down in the comments. Let me know, let everybody that's watching the video know down in the comments. Everybody has a different way of doing weathering. There's 100 different ways. And I'd love to hear how you do it down in the comments down below. Thanks for joining me here. I really do appreciate it. Please hit that like button if you enjoyed. Helps out here on the channel and with the video. Leave me those comments down below. Hit the subscribe button if you like to keep up with videos like this. And if you'd like to see this model in the future, in the video series we're going to be filming in the future, hit that subscribe button so you get notified when that comes out. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in another video. Bye-bye.